This next step is called spreading the web, and in this instance I like this pincushion loom better than the 3D printed looms or the ones that have the holes in them, because we don't have to measure the thread out ahead of time. We just put the ball of yarn in a box or bowl on the floor, and we just keep lacing the loom until we're done, and then we leave a reserve of thread left over to finish our pattern. So you can pretty much stitch a whole design most of the time without any knots or having to add new thread or whatever. Sometimes it's impossible with the bigger patterns, but with this small pattern it's quite possible to have plenty of thread left over at the end of lacing to weave your entire pattern with no knots on the back, or very few. So Melissa had a good idea of buying one of those collapsible dog bowls that just fold up flat, and she uses that for portability, and that's a good thing to put your ball of yarn in. So I thought that was a really good idea. So what we're going to do first is get a glass-headed pin or some sort of a big pin like that with a big head on it, and just make an anchor point at the top of your loom. It can be at the bottom, it doesn't matter. And then push that down, and that'll hold your thread pretty steady while we do the lacing. So my loom is marked A and B. I didn't need any other marks. You can print up some patterns that have the numbers all the way around, but I don't feel like it's needed for a simple design like this. So we're just going to pull this down. I'm pulling mine to the left of A, and then I'm bringing it around to the right of B. And you want to keep it pretty taut, but no distortion. You don't want to start moving your pins or anything like that. But this web needs to be really neat and even. So we're always going to be moving clockwise around the loom, and I'm going to come to the right of B and go clockwise around that pin. It's kind of hard to do this without my fingers in the way. And then I'm going to come back up to A. This thread here is not going to be part of this part until the end. We'll see what to do with that thread in the end. So I came clockwise around A, and now I'm going to come down to B, and I'm going to find the next empty pin to the clockwise side of B, and then try to hold that so how I would normally do it without getting in your way. I would normally just keep doing that. So we're coming back up to the top and the next empty pin clockwise of A. And we're going to keep repeating that. The next empty pin clockwise of B, and just keep wrapping. And this goes really fast on this loom. So sometimes I prefer this loom. Just depends. And then you have more versatility in the patterns available to you. When you have a 3D printed loom or a wooden loom, you're fixed to the number of holes that are designed in the loom. This one you can just put your pattern down and do whatever you want to do. So I'll turn my loom as needed. Try to maybe fast forward this part of the video so that it doesn't get too long, because this part's pretty easy. And then every now and then I'll kind of scooch everything to the middle, and you may need from time to time, if you see your threads, or we call them ends, if they start overlapping each other, these that are around the pins need to lay flat and separate from each other. But the way we're crossing in the middle will cause them to kind of twist on top of each other, but most of that will be fixed once we start weaving. It'll start evening things out. But right at first you may want to just straighten it up as you go. When you're weaving, you see something's kind of messed up. Alright, so at this point my B is there and my A is here, and I'm going to start weaving at A on this loom. I kind of do it different on the 3D printed loom, but I'm going to release the pin from the part that we had at the bottom. And we can just start putting our pins down. And I may pause the video at this point so you don't have to watch me doing this. You can leave the B pin up just for the time because we're still kind of, well, actually it's this one that I'm still pulling on. So the one that's still not finished, just leave that one sticking up. So I'm going to go ahead and pause at this time. Alright, I finished putting all my pins down except for that one that's still holding this thread right here. And this is my little short tail that was originally pinned to the top. So this piece of thread is finishing up the double end that is coming around that pin, and it's going to stop in the middle. So I still have not cut my thread off of the ball yet because we need to measure out enough for our project. So I'm just going to turn this the way I need to do it. It's kind of a square knot. Sometimes mine doesn't turn out very square because of the way I'm holding everything. So I'm just going to go around twice to make it hold better so that you don't have to have someone there to put their finger to hold it in place. So if you go around twice and then you scooch it down and center it as best as you can. If you have to, you can stick a pin there to help you out, but it looks like mine's holding pretty good. The cotton thread usually holds well. So I'm going to throw in a couple of knots, and you want that taut like the rest of you don't want that floppy. That's why this knot is important, and plus it needs to hold once we start weaving. So I've done a couple of knots. So you're going to cut this short tail and knot off of the ball. So I'm just cutting this one about 1/4 inch. Later on I'm going to come and put some fray check on there and trim that down. So now is the time to measure out how much yarn you need to, or thread or whatever you're using, to finish weaving your project. And usually about 40 inches, 45, maybe 1.5 yards will work. But I usually do a couple of arm lengths so I can have plenty and yet not have all the worry about tangling. So I usually just take the loom and put it by my chin, and I measure out from my chin to my hand, and I measure out a couple of times. And that's usually a comfortable length to work with. And so this will be the end of this step because we finished spreading the web, and so the next videos will show the actual pattern that we're going to be weaving.